What would you do if you had it all? The perfect marriage, a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. Now, what would you do if you discovered in a single heart-shattering moment that it was all built on a foundation of lies? For Isabella Rossi, the answer wasn't to scream or cry or even to leave. Her response was something far more terrifying. She found the woman sleeping with her husband, and she gave her a job. This isn't a story about forgiveness. It's a story about control, about a woman pushed to the edge who decided to rewrite her own tragedy, one calculated, devastating move at a time. The life Isabella Rossi had meticulously built was a masterpiece of modern success. At 34, she was the founder and CEO of Aura, a boutique marketing agency in the heart of the city that had become the go-to for luxury brands seeking an edge. Her office, a symphony of glass chrome and soft gray furnishings, overlooked the sprawling metropolis, a daily reminder of the heights she had climbed. Her apartment, a spacious loft in a converted warehouse district, was her sanctuary. It smelled of Jo Malone candles, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint sweet scent of the expensive prenatal lotions she now massaged into her burgeoning 7-month baby bump. Her husband, Ethan Hayes, was the final perfect brushstroke in this portrait of domestic bliss. Handsome, with a disarming smile and the easy confidence of a man who worked in high finance, he was her rock. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into a deep, comfortable love. He was the calm to her storm, the steady hand on her back at industry events, the man who would listen for hours as she mapped out campaign strategies on their living room floor. He was, she believed, her soulmate, the father of her unborn child. The first crack in this porcelain existence appeared on a Tuesday. It was late, well past midnight. Isabella had been jolted awake by the baby kicking, a now familiar and welcome intrusion. She smiled, rubbing her belly, and glanced over at Ethan. He was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His phone, which was usually on his nightstand, was on the floor, having slipped from his hand. As she reached down to retrieve it, the screen lit up. A notification from an app she didn't recognize, a stylized flame icon. The message preview was short, but it was enough to stop the air in her lungs. Khloe, still awake. Can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Isabella's blood ran cold. It was a physical sensation. A painful iciness that started in her chest and spread to her fingertips. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process the words. Khloe. The name was a foreign object, a piece of shrapnel embedded in the soft tissue of her life. Last night Ethan had been late. A last-minute client dinner, he'd said. He had come home smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers. At the time, she hadn't thought twice. She trusted him. Her first instinct was a tidal wave of raw primal rage. She wanted to shake him awake, to shove the phone in his face and watch his perfect features crumble into a mask of guilt. She wanted to scream, to shatter the quiet peace of their home, to let out the animalistic cry that was clawing at her throat. But then a different instinct took over. It was the CEO in her, the strategist who never made a move without first understanding the entire board. Screaming would give him the advantage. He would deny, deflect, gaslight. He would call her hormonal, accuse her of being paranoid because of the pregnancy. He would seize control of the narrative. No, she would not give him that. With hands that trembled almost uncontrollably, she picked up the phone. His thumb, limp and sleep, was all she needed. She pressed it against the home button. The phone unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, panicked bird. The app was a dating app, one known for discreet encounters. Their message history was a novel of betrayal. Weeks of it. Months. I've never felt like this with anyone, Ethan had written. When are you going to tell her, Khloe had asked just 3 days ago. Soon, baby. I promise. It has to be delicate. She's pregnant. The word delicate was a particular cruelty. He was handling the destruction of their marriage with the same detached care he would afford a sensitive stock portfolio, And the use of her pregnancy, their child, as a shield, as an excuse for his cowardice, that was the deepest cut of all. Isabella didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room, the city lights a blur through her unshed tears. The rage was still there, a simmering cauldron in her gut, but now it was accompanied by a chilling, crystalline clarity. Divorce was inevitable. Her life as she knew it was over. But it would not end like this. She would not be the weeping, broken victim in this drama. She was Isabella Rossi. She built brands from nothing. She could surely orchestrate a demolition. She needed to know her enemy. The next morning she operated on pure adrenaline. She feigned a headache, letting Ethan fuss over her before he left for work, his kiss on her forehead feeling like the brand of a liar. The moment the door closed behind him, she was at her laptop. Khloe. The dating app profile was sparse, but it had a last name, Bennett. A quick search on social media brought her to an Instagram profile. Khloe Bennett. 26, pretty in a fresh-faced girl-next-door way, with a feed full of artistic photos of brunch cityscapes and selfies that radiated a hungry ambition. Her bio read graphic designer, dreamer, making things beautiful. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea. Making things beautiful. She was trying to make something beautiful on the wreckage of Isabella's life. With a few more clicks, Isabella found her professional portfolio online and then her LinkedIn profile. Khloe Bennett was a freelance graphic designer, talented even. Her aesthetic was clean, modern, and aligned perfectly with the kind of clients Aura represented. And that's when the idea began to form. It was a monstrous, terrifying, and utterly brilliant thought. It started as a whisper in the back of her mind, a flicker of vengeance so audacious it almost made her laugh. What if she didn't just watch Khloe from a distance? What if she brought her closer? What if she made this woman who was secretly trying to dismantle her life directly dependent on her for a paycheck? The plan was insane. Her best friend Amelia would have her committed, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. It was a move no one would ever see coming. It was a way to reclaim her power, not by ending the game, but by changing the rules so completely that she was the only one who knew how to play. She would learn every one of Khloe's weaknesses, her fears, her ambitions. She would see with her own eyes what Ethan saw in her, and she would do it all from the ultimate position of power as her boss. Her agency, Aura, just happened to have a job opening for a mid-level graphic designer. The listing had gone up last week. Isabella's fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened her work email, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, steely resolve. She found the generic HR email address listed on Khloe Bennett's professional website. Subject: Graphic Design Opportunity at Aura. Dear Ms. Bennett, my name is Isabella Rossi, CEO of Aura Marketing. I came across your portfolio online and was exceptionally impressed with the quality and creativity of your work. Your aesthetic aligns perfectly with the direction we are taking with several of our key luxury accounts. We currently have an opening for a senior graphic designer, a position that I believe would be an excellent fit for your talents. If you are interested in exploring this opportunity, I would like to invite you to our offices for an interview at your earliest convenience. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Isabella Rossi. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email shot into the digital void, a declaration of war disguised as a job offer. She leaned back in her chair, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. The baby kicked again, a small internal flutter. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered to the empty room. "Mommy's got this." The war had begun, and Isabella Rossi was about to bring her enemy right through the front gates. 2 days later, Khloe Bennett walked into the polished, intimidatingly serene reception area of Aura Marketing. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, her chosen outfit a chic but professional black jumpsuit radiating a carefully constructed confidence. She was nervous, but it was the excited nervousness of a young professional on the cusp of a major career breakthrough. Aura was the big leagues. A job here working directly under the legendary Isabella Rossi was the kind of thing you dreamed about. She had been ecstatic when she received the email. Isabella Rossi herself had reached out. Khloe had bragged about it to Ethan over a clandestine lunch, her voice buzzing with excitement. She said she was exceptionally impressed with my work. Can you believe it? She'd gushed. Ethan had frozen for a second, a forkful of pasta halfway to his mouth. Isabella Rossi at Aura. Yes, isn't it amazing? It's a small world, he'd said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He felt a prickle of unease, a strange convergence of his two separate lives that felt dangerous. But he'd quickly dismissed it. It was a coincidence. A bizarre, unnerving coincidence, but nothing more. He couldn't possibly tell Khloe that his wife was the CEO who wanted to hire her. The lie was too deep, the deception too entangled. So he simply said, "Wow, Khloe, that's incredible. You deserve it." Now standing in the heart of Isabella's empire, Khloe had no idea she was a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. The receptionist led her down a long hallway to a corner office with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. And there she was, Isabella Rossi. She was even more formidable in person. Even heavily pregnant, she commanded the space. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored cream-colored maternity dress that looked like it cost more than Khloe's rent. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun, and her expression was one of cool, unreadable authority. She didn't rise. She simply gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming in. I'm Isabella Rossi." "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Rossi," Khloe said, her voice a little breathier than she would have liked. She noticed the wedding ring, a formidable diamond that seemed to catch and refract the light with an accusatory gleam. "Please have a seat," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. She didn't smile. The interview began with standard questions. Isabella asked about Khloe's design philosophy, her experience with specific software, and her previous freelance projects. Khloe, growing in confidence, answered fluently, opening her portfolio to showcase her best work. She was good. Isabella had to give her that. It made it all the more infuriating. Then Isabella's questions began to shift. The change was subtle, a scalpel slipping between the ribs. "Tell me about your long-term goals, Khloe. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Isabella asked, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped over her baby bump. The subtext screamed in her own mind. "Do you see yourself in my house raising my child?" "I want to be a creative director," Khloe answered earnestly. "I want to be leading a team, shaping a brand's entire identity. I'm very ambitious." "Ambition is good," Isabella said, her gaze unwavering. "But it can make people reckless. How do you handle high-pressure situations? Say when you're dealing with a difficult client or when personal and professional lines get blurred." Khloe felt a flicker of unease at the phrasing. "I believe in maintaining professionalism at all times," she said carefully. "Clear communication and managing expectations are key. You have to keep things separate." "Oh, do you now?" Isabella thought, a bitter, silent laugh echoing in her head. "Like keeping your affair with a married man separate from his pregnant wife." "An excellent answer," Isabella said aloud, her face a perfect mask of corporate approval. She flipped a page in Khloe's resume, though she wasn't reading it. She had already memorized every word. "It says here you value dedication and building lasting relationships. How do you define loyalty in a professional context, Khloe?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Khloe shifted in her seat. "Loyalty is about commitment. It's about seeing a project through, about being trustworthy and having the company's best interests at heart. It's about honoring the faith that someone puts in you." Each word was a fresh stab in Isabella's heart. This woman could sit here in her office and speak of loyalty while actively trying to steal her husband. The audacity was breathtaking. Isabella felt the rage churning, but she channeled it into an icy calm. This was not about losing control. This was about taking it. "I see," Isabella said slowly, her eyes boring into Khloe's. "And what about when a situation becomes untenable? when you find yourself in a position that is ethically compromised? Do you walk away, or do you see it through hoping for a different outcome? Khloe's professional smile faltered. The questions were becoming strangely personal, intensely philosophical for a design job interview. She thought of Ethan, of the promises he'd made, of the stolen nights, and the guilt that sometimes gnawed at her. I believe in fighting for what you want, Khloe said, her voice hardening slightly, a flash of the defiance Isabella had seen in her Instagram bio. If you believe something is worth it, you don't just give up. It was the confirmation Isabella needed. Khloe wasn't some naive girl swept up in a fantasy. She was a fighter. She had a goal, Ethan, and she was not going to back down. Isabella stood up, a clear signal that the interview was over. Khloe scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. Had she blown it? Had she said something wrong? Isabella walked around the desk, her presence filling the room. She stopped directly in front of Khloe, close enough that Khloe could smell the expensive, subtle scent of her perfume. It smelled like power. "You're very impressive, Khloe," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You're hungry, you're talented, and you're not afraid to fight for what you want. I like that." She extended a hand. "The job is yours. We can offer you a salary 60% higher than your current freelance rate, full benefits, and a significant signing bonus. We would need you to start Monday." Khloe was stunned into silence. She hadn't even discussed salary yet. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams. The money, the prestige, the job itself, it was everything she had been working for. All her doubts vanished, replaced by a wave of triumphant elation. "Yes," she stammered, shaking Isabella's hand. Isabella's grip was firm, cool, and lingered a moment too long. "Absolutely yes. Thank you, Mrs. Rossi. Thank you so much. You won't regret this." Isabella finally allowed herself a small, tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and held a glint of something terrifying. "Oh, I know I won't," she said softly. As Khloe practically floated out of the office, dizzy with success, Isabella remained standing by the glass wall. She watched the younger woman's retreating back until she disappeared down the hall. She had done it. The fox was now in the henhouse. But the farmer was waiting, holding the keys to the cage. The first part of her plan was complete. Now the real torture could begin. She placed a hand on her belly, a silent promise to her child. The game was afoot, and she was about to find out just how loyal and dedicated Khloe Bennett truly was, not just to her new job, but to her husband. Khloe's first week at Aura was a dizzying blur of new systems, new colleagues, and the intoxicating thrill of legitimacy. The office was even more impressive from the inside. She had her own spacious cubicle with a brand new top-of-the-line computer. Her colleagues were sharp, stylish, and welcoming. And the salary, her first paycheck, hit her account that Friday, a figure so substantial it made her feel giddy. This was it. This was the life she was meant to live. Her boss, Isabella Rossi, was an enigma. She was brilliant, demanding, and possessed an almost supernatural attention to detail. In meetings, she could dissect a campaign concept with surgical precision, her insights leaving everyone in the room scrambling to take notes. Khloe was in awe of her. She was also terrified of her. Isabella's management style was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as corporate rigor. On Khloe's first day, Isabella assigned her to a major new client, a high-end Swiss watchmaker. It was a huge vote of confidence, and Khloe was determined to prove herself. She poured her heart and soul into the initial branding concepts, working late into the night, fueled by ambition and takeout coffee. She presented her work to Isabella on Wednesday afternoon, her hands trembling slightly as she walked her new boss through the sleek, sophisticated designs. Isabella listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Khloe finished, she stared at the presentation on the screen for a long, agonizing minute. "It's competent," Isabella said, finally, the word landing like a slap. "But it has no soul, Khloe. It feels generic. It's what anyone would do. I hired you because I thought you were exceptional, not competent." She pointed to a specific font Khloe had chosen. This font, it's too soft. It suggests a lack of conviction. Start over. I want to see something with more strength by Friday morning. Khloe was crushed. She had thought the designs were her best work, but she nodded meekly, gathered her things, and returned to her desk, her face burning with humiliation. She spent the next 36 hours in a frantic caffeine-fueled haze redesigning the entire campaign from scratch. Meanwhile, Isabella watched. From her glass-walled office, she had a clear view of the entire floor. She saw Khloe's shoulders slump in defeat. She saw her rubbing her tired eyes, and she felt a grim, satisfying twist in her gut. This was just the beginning. The torment was in the details. Isabella would casually walk past Khloe's desk while Khloe was on a furtive, whispered phone call, presumably with Ethan. Isabella wouldn't break her stride, but her presence was enough to make Khloe stammer and quickly hang up. One afternoon, Isabella called Khloe into her office. "I have a personal favor to ask," she said, her tone making it clear it was not a request. "My husband's company is hosting a charity gala next month. We handle the marketing pro bono. I need a stunning invitation designed, something classic elegant." Khloe's blood ran cold. My husband. She had to design an invitation for an event hosted by her lover's company for her lover's wife. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "Of course, Mrs. Rossi," she managed to say. "His name is Ethan Hayes." Isabella continued watching Khloe's face for the slightest flicker of recognition. "He's a senior VP at Sterling Cross Capital. Perhaps you've heard of him." Khloe's heart hammered in her chest. She forced a neutral expression, a skill she was rapidly learning was essential for survival at Aura. "I don't believe so, but I'll get right on it." "Good," Isabella said, turning back to her computer. "He's very particular. He'll want to see the proofs himself." The lie was seamless. Ethan had never seen a proof in his life, but it was the perfect excuse to create a pressure cooker. Life for Ethan was becoming increasingly confusing. The affair, which had once been a thrilling escape, was now a source of stress. Khloe was no longer the carefree, adventurous woman he had been drawn to. She was constantly exhausted and on edge. "My boss is a nightmare," she complained during a hurried secret dinner. "She's a slave driver, a perfectionist. She had me redo an entire campaign because she didn't like the conviction of the font." "Then quit," Ethan said, exasperated. "You don't need this job, Khloe." "Quit, Ethan, are you crazy? This is Aura. The money is incredible and the name on my resume is priceless. I just have to stick it out. It's just, her husband is a client and I have to design this whole gala invitation for them. It's so awkward." Ethan almost choked on his wine. Her husband. She's married. Of course she's married. She's massively pregnant, for God's sake. I think she's due in a couple of months. I feel so bad for the guy, honestly. She must be impossible to live with. A cold dread washed over Ethan. A pregnant CEO named Isabella. A husband whose company was a client. It couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. He felt a desperate need to know his lover's boss's last name. "What's her name?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Isabella. I don't know her last name. Everyone just calls her Isabella or Mrs. R," Khloe replied, oblivious. "Anyway, I have to run. I have to pull an all-nighter to get this gala design perfect for Ethan Hayes." The name hit him like a physical blow. Ethan Hayes. She had said his name. He stared at her, his mind racing, connecting the dots with sickening speed. Isabella Rossi. Aura. Pregnant. His company. His name. It wasn't a coincidence. His wife had hired his mistress. The realization didn't come with a bang, but with a horrifying, silent implosion. He felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't bad luck. This was a plan. A deliberate, calculated, psychopathic plan. His brilliant, strategic wife, the woman he had underestimated, was playing a game so complex he couldn't even see the board. He looked across the table at Khloe, who was reapplying her lipstick, complaining about kerning and paper stock. She had no idea. She was a lamb being led to a slaughter she couldn't even conceive of. And he was trapped. What could he do if he told Khloe she would confront Isabella and the explosion would be catastrophic? If he confronted Isabella, she held all the cards. She could ruin him not just personally but professionally. His wife wasn't just angry. She was dismantling his life piece by piece from the inside out, and she was using his own mistress as the tool. The next few weeks were a living hell for both Khloe and Ethan. Isabella's cruelty became more refined. She would schedule last-minute emergency meetings on Friday evenings, forcing Khloe to cancel her plans with Ethan. She would praise Khloe's work in front of the entire team, only to rip it apart in private moments later. The ultimate twist of the knife came one Tuesday afternoon. Isabella buzzed Khloe on the intercom. "Khloe, could you come in here for a moment?" When Khloe entered the office, Isabella was on her speakerphone. "So I'll just meet you there around 7:30, honey," Isabella was saying. "Love you." "Love you too, Izzy," Ethan's voice replied from the speaker, a voice Khloe knew intimately. Khloe froze, her blood turning to ice water. That voice. It was Ethan's. There was no mistaking it. Izzy. That was his pet name for his wife. Isabella hung up the phone and looked up at Khloe, a picture of innocence. "Sorry about that. My husband," she said with a warm, wifely smile. "He can be a little needy. Now about the banner ads for the Sterling Cross Gala." Khloe stood rooted to the spot, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and horror. Ethan's wife was named Isabella, Izzy, and she was the CEO of Aura, the pregnant, terrifying, brilliant CEO who was making her life a living hell. It all crashed down on her at once. The coincidence. The strangely personal questions in the interview. The constant pressure. The impossible demands. The overheard phone call. This wasn't a job. It was a prison. A gilded cage she had gleefully walked into. She looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time. The cool, appraising gaze. The faint, knowing curl of her lip. The hand resting possessively on her pregnant belly. This wasn't a boss. This was a woman who knew everything. And in that moment, Khloe Bennett understood that she was not a participant in an affair. She was a character in a revenge plot. And the protagonist, the writer and the director, was the formidable, terrifying woman sitting right in front of her. The fear she felt was profound, a primal terror that went far beyond losing a job. She had vastly, catastrophically underestimated her enemy. The revelation shattered Khloe's world. The office, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a panopticon, a prison where the warden watched her every move with knowing, vengeful eyes. Every task, every email, every casual comment from Isabella was now laden with terrifying subtext. A request to pick up coffee was a test of her servitude. Praise for her work was a cruel joke. Criticism was a direct personal attack. Khloe began to unravel, her sleek ambition frayed into raw paranoia. She saw conspiracies everywhere. When a file on her computer was accidentally deleted by an IT glitch, she was convinced Isabella was behind it. When she was assigned the tedious task of archiving thousands of old image files, she saw it as punishment. She started making mistakes, typos, and important copy deadlines missed by a few hours. Her work, once her pride, began to suffer under the weight of her psychological torment. Her clandestine meetings with Ethan became fraught with a new kind of desperation. "She knows Ethan. She knows everything," Khloe hissed, huddled together in a noisy, anonymous bar far from either of their usual neighborhoods. "She called you on speakerphone right in front of me. She called you honey, and you called her Izzy." Ethan, who had been living with this dreadful knowledge for weeks, feigned shock. "What? No. You must have misheard. There are lots of guys named Ethan." It was a weak, pathetic defense, and he knew it, but admitting he already knew would expose his cowardice, his complicity in her suffering. "Don't lie to me." Khloe's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "Her name is Isabella Rossi. Your wife's name is Isabella. She's the CEO of Aura. It's all been a game. She's been torturing me, and you just let it happen." "I didn't know, I swear." He lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Khloe, you have to quit. Now. Just walk away from it." And go where? She shot back, her fear turning to anger. She'll ruin me, Ethan. She's connected to everyone in this city. If I just walk out, she could blacklist me. I'll never work in this town again. You have to do something. You have to confront her. Fix this. Fix this. Ethan felt a surge of panicked fury. You're the one who started seeing a married man. I'm the one whose wife is orchestrating some kind of Machiavellian revenge plot. We are so far past fixing this. The argument spiraled, their hushed, angry whispers lost in the din of the bar. Their affair, once a secret, passionate escape, had become a toxic, claustrophobic trap, and Isabella was the one holding the key. Meanwhile, Isabella had an observer of her own. Her best friend Amelia, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer, had watched Isabella's transformation with growing alarm. She sat in Isabella's living room surrounded by baby shower gifts, her expression one of deep concern. Izzy, this has gone on long enough, Amelia said, her voice gentle but firm. I get it. He betrayed you. You wanted revenge. You hired the mistress. It's the plot of a crazy movie. But you're 8 months pregnant. You're toying with this girl, you're driving yourself mad with stress, and for what? To prove a point you've already won. You have all the evidence you need to divorce him and take him for everything he's worth. Isabella calmly folded a tiny onesie, her movements deliberate. It's not about the money, Mia. And it's not about proving a point. It's about control. He took the control away from me. He made me a victim. I am taking it back. I need to see this through to the end. And what is the end? Amelia pressed. What's your endgame here? You humiliate them both, and then what? You're still having a baby with this man. This level of vengeance. It leaves scars on everyone, including you. I'm not the one who will be scarred, Isabella said, her voice dropping to an unnerving calm. I'm the one holding the scalpel. But even Isabella was beginning to feel the strain. The constant performance was exhausting. The rage, which had once been a hot, motivating fire, had cooled into a heavy, cold stone in her chest. She wanted it to be over. But she couldn't just fire Khloe and divorce Ethan. It felt too simple, too anticlimactic. She needed a finale. She needed a checkmate. And then a new twist emerged, one that not even Isabella in her meticulous planning could have anticipated. It was a discovery that would change the entire nature of the game. Isabella had asked Khloe to consolidate all the files for the Swiss watch account onto a single external hard drive for a client review. It was another make-work task designed to keep Khloe busy and stressed. That evening, after Khloe had left, her face pale and drawn, Isabella took the hard drive into her office. She wasn't checking Khloe's work. She was looking for something else. A part of her, the strategist, wanted to know if Khloe had been careless, if she'd left any personal files on the drive. She plugged it into her computer. Nestled deep within a folder of stock images mislabeled as textures was a hidden folder. Its name was E.H. Financials. Isabella's breath caught. E.H. Ethan Hayes. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. It wasn't just a few files. It was a treasure trove of corporate espionage. There were screenshots of Ethan's private work emails, scans of documents from his desk at Sterling Cross Capital, detailed spreadsheets analyzing his stock portfolio, his bonuses, even the projected value of his inheritance from his parents. But it was the last subfolder that made Isabella's blood run cold. It was labeled Divorce Scenarios. Inside was a series of documents that modeled out potential divorce settlements. There were calculations based on infidelity clauses, asset division in their state, and even speculative assessments of how much Isabella's company, Aura, was worth. Khloe hadn't just been sleeping with her husband. She had been systematically investigating his wealth planning for the eventual breakup and her subsequent payday. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a meticulously planned heist. The realization hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. She had seen Khloe as a rival for her husband's affection, a homewrecker. But she was wrong. Khloe Bennett wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator. A grifter who had targeted Ethan, likely seeing him as an easy mark. The affair wasn't the goal. It was the leverage. Suddenly, the entire narrative shifted. This was no longer just about a husband's betrayal. It was about an attack on her family, her finances, her legacy, and the future security of her unborn child. Khloe wasn't some lovesick girl who deserved pity or even a simple, straightforward revenge. She was a calculating adversary who needed to be neutralized. A new ferocious energy surged through Isabella. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. Her plan had been about emotional revenge, about reclaiming her power. Now it was about something far more primal: protection. She looked at the evidence on the screen. Khloe had been using Aura's resources, its computers, its servers, to conduct this corporate espionage. She had been building a case against Ethan while on Isabella's payroll. This wasn't just infidelity, it was grounds for a lawsuit. It was a weapon. Amelia's words echoed in her head. "What's your endgame here?" Now, Isabella knew. The endgame wasn't just going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an annihilation. She had the means to destroy not just her husband's affair, but the mistress herself, professionally and legally. She carefully copied the entire Financials folder onto her own secure server, a digital smoking gun. Then she wiped the original from the hard drive, leaving no trace of her discovery. She leaned back in her chair, a chillingly serene smile gracing her lips for the first time in months. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, and her path forward was brutally clear. The launch party for the Swiss watch client was in 2 weeks. It was being held at a chic downtown art gallery. It was the perfect stage. Everyone would be there: her team, her clients, the city's media. And of course, her supportive husband Ethan would be by her side. And the project's lead designer, Khloe Bennett, would be running the presentation. It was time to plan the grand finale. The night of the Chronolux launch party was electric. The art gallery buzzed with the low hum of influential people, journalists, industry titans, and Aura's most valued clients, all sipping champagne and admiring the sleek watch displays. The event was the culmination of months of work, a testament to Aura's prowess, and a personal triumph for Isabella. She moved through the crowd, a radiant, formidable queen in her own court. She was dressed in a custom-made deep emerald gown that draped elegantly over her 8.5-month pregnant form. She didn't look tired or strained. She looked powerful, regal. At her side, playing his part, was Ethan. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, but a keen observer would notice the tension in his jaw, the sweat on his brow. He knew something was coming. The air around his wife was too calm, too charged. It was the unnerving stillness before a lightning strike. Across the room, Khloe Bennett was a nervous wreck. She was dressed in a severe black dress, trying to look professional, but her hands were shaking as she double-checked the presentation on a laptop behind the main stage. This party was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the moment her hard work on the Chronolux account paid off. Instead, it felt like her own execution. For weeks she had been trapped, working under the terrifying gaze of the woman she had wronged, forced to interact with her, to take orders, to even design the very invitations for this event that now felt like a stage for her own humiliation. Her plan to secure a comfortable future by leveraging Ethan had backfired spectacularly, landing her in a psychological prison. All she wanted was for this night to be over. Isabella had set the stage with the precision of a master director. She had given Khloe a critical role, not just running the main presentation, but also curating a behind-the-scenes digital display that would loop on screens around the venue. She had also, 2 days prior, orchestrated a piece of masterful disinformation. During a casual conversation with another senior staff member, loud enough for Khloe to overhear, Isabella had mentioned a massive last-minute investment deal Ethan's firm Sterling Cross was making in Chronolux, contingent on the success of the launch. She mentioned a 7-figure success bonus for Ethan personally. It was a complete fabrication, but it was the perfect bait. For a grifter like Khloe, the idea of Ethan receiving a huge, immediate cash windfall would be an irresistible lure, making her feel even more desperate about her precarious position. The main presentation began. The lights dimmed. Khloe, from her station at the back, started the slideshow. Images of stunning watches and evocative lifestyle shots filled the giant screen on stage. The presentation was flawless, a testament to Khloe's talent even under duress. When it concluded, the room erupted in applause. The CEO of Chronolux gave a short, effusive speech praising Aura and their brilliant team. Then he introduced the woman of the hour. And now I'd like to welcome the visionary behind this entire campaign, the CEO of Aura, Isabella Rossi. Isabella walked onto the stage, a picture of grace and power. The applause swelled. Ethan watched from the front row, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. Thank you, everyone. Isabella began, her voice resonating with warmth and authority. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your trust in us. At Aura, we believe that a brand isn't just a product, it's a story. It's about heritage, integrity, and most importantly, it's about trust. She paused, letting the word trust hang in the air. She smiled, a dazzling, brilliant smile that didn't reach her cold, focused eyes. Building something of lasting value, she continued. Whether it's a brand or a life requires an unwavering commitment to that trust. But sometimes that trust is broken. Sometimes the story you think you're living is revealed to be a complete fiction. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the standard corporate thank you speech. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to stand up to run, but he was frozen in his seat. Tonight we've celebrated a story of precision, elegance, and legacy, Isabella said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. But I want to share another story. A more personal one. It's a case study, if you will, in brand demolition. She gestured to the large screen behind her. The Chronolux logo vanished. In its place, an image appeared. It was a screenshot of a text message. Khloe, can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Khloe at the back of the room felt the world tilt on its axis. Her presentation remote clattered from her nerveless fingers. This couldn't be happening. This is a message sent to my husband, Ethan Hayes. Isabella announced, her voice as clear as a bell, from one of my employees. Another image flashed on the screen. It was Khloe's smiling, ambitious face from her LinkedIn profile. The audience turned as one searching for her. Khloe shrank back into the shadows, her face a mask of pure horror. My husband, Isabella said, turning her gaze slowly to lock onto Ethan's. The man standing by my side, building a life with me, waiting for the birth of our first child. Ethan looked up at her, his expression one of utter ruin. He was exposed, flayed open in front of his colleagues, his clients, the world. But this story has another twist, Isabella continued, her voice hardening. Because I learned that this wasn't just a simple, sordid affair. This was a business transaction. The screen changed again. Now it displayed the files from Khloe's hidden folder. Spreadsheets titled EH Financials. Documents titled Divorce Scenarios. A detailed analysis of Sterling Cross Capital's bonus structure. You see, Isabella explained calmly, as if delivering a standard marketing report. My employee, Ms. Khloe Bennett, wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was using my company's resources to conduct a thorough financial investigation of him. She was planning to leverage her affair into a lucrative divorce settlement. It was a hostile takeover of my life, executed on my time and with my money. The room was utterly silent now, a tomb of shocked faces. All eyes were on Isabella, this heavily pregnant woman standing on a stage, calmly and methodically dismantling two lives with cold, hard evidence on a 20-foot screen. She finally turned her attention to the back of the room, her voice laced with ice. Khloe, you once told me in your interview that loyalty was about honoring the faith someone puts in you. You told me you fight for what you want. I suppose I should thank you for showing me exactly what you believe is worth fighting for. She looked back at the crowd. Security, she said, her voice ringing with finality. Will you please escort Ms. Bennett from the premises? Her employment at Aura is of course terminated. We will be pursuing legal action for corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property. Two burly security guards began to make their way toward the back of the room where Khloe stood paralyzed and sobbing. Then Isabella's gaze fell upon her husband one last time. The look she gave him was not one of rage, but of cold, dismissive finality. It was the look you would give a stranger a mistake that had been erased. "And as for you, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping yet audible to everyone in the stunned silence, "consider this your notice. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Amelia," she nodded to her friend in the front row, "you know what to do." With that, Isabella Rossi, CEO, wife, and mother-to-be, turned away from the wreckage she had wrought, placed a hand on her belly, and walked off the stage, leaving behind a tableau of ruin and the deafening sound of silence. The grand finale was over. Checkmate. In the aftermath of what the city's gossip columns dubbed the Gala of Annihilation, the lives of Ethan Hayes and Khloe Bennett were irrevocably shattered. Ethan was fired from Sterling Cross within a week, his reputation in the high-stakes world of finance reduced to ashes. The public humiliation was absolute. Khloe Bennett vanished. Faced with a lawsuit from Aura and complete professional ostracization, she disappeared from the city, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in marketing agencies and bars. Isabella, however, did not crumble. The divorce was swift and brutal, with the evidence from the gala making any contest by Ethan impossible. She was awarded a settlement that secured her future and her child's future tenfold. 3 weeks after the party, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Sophia, meaning wisdom. 6 months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of her loft. The city sprawled before her, no longer just a symbol of her ambition, but a testament to her resilience. In her arms, Sophia gurgled happily, her tiny hand wrapped around Isabella's finger. Aura was more successful than ever, with clients clamoring to be represented by the woman who had demonstrated such breathtaking strategic command. She was a single mother, yes, but she was not broken. She had been betrayed, but she was not a victim. She had taken the shattered pieces of her perfect life and used them to build a new foundation, stronger and more authentic than before. The cold fire of vengeance had been extinguished, replaced by the fierce, warm glow of a mother's love, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had emerged victorious on her own terms. The story wasn't a tragedy of a wife scorned. It was the origin story of a queen who had built her own throne. Isabella's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most. But it's also a story of incredible strength. She refused to be a victim. She took control of her own narrative and delivered a masterclass in justice. What do you think? Was Isabella a strategic genius who delivered a well-deserved reckoning, or did her quest for revenge go too far? Could you ever do what she did? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The glittering chandeliers of the Grand Oak Ballroom reflected in Victoria Sterling's champagne flute, but the sparkle couldn't reach the icy dread coiling in her stomach. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of her husband Richard's latest triumph, a merger that would solidify his empire. But as Richard took the stage, his hand wasn't reaching for hers. It was entwined with a woman whose smile was as polished as the marble floors, a woman he introduced not as a colleague, not as a friend, but with 3 words that shattered Victoria's world: my new wife. Little did he know, while he was rewriting their life story, she was about to erase his name from every asset he owned. Victoria Sterling had long been the epitome of quiet elegance, a woman who moved through the gilded circles of New York high society with an understated grace that many mistook for fragility. She was the perfect wife for a man like Richard Sterling, a real estate magnate whose ambition was as towering as the skyscrapers that bore his name. Theirs was a life curated for magazine spreads, a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue with panoramic views of Central Park summers in the Hamptons, and a collection of art that could rival a small museum. To the outside world, they were a power couple, a testament to having it all. But Victoria knew the truth. Their life, once a vibrant tapestry of shared dreams and passionate nights, had faded into a carefully orchestrated performance. The laughter no longer reached Richard's eyes, and his touch, when it came, felt more like a formality than an act of affection. She had first noticed the change about a year ago. It was subtle at first. Late nights at the office, he claimed, were due to a demanding new project, a sudden obsession with his phone that he'd angle away from her, the faint unfamiliar scent of perfume on his collar that he'd brush off as a chance encounter with an overzealous client. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, had tried to address it. She suggested counseling, a vacation, anything to bridge the chasm that was silently growing between them. Richard had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, attributing her worries to pregnancy hormones. Yes, Victoria was pregnant. 7 months along with the child they had both so desperately wanted, a child she had thought would be the glue to mend the cracks in their marriage. Now the gentle kicks in her womb felt less like a promise of new life and more like a countdown to an impending storm. Tonight was the annual Sterling Enterprises Gala, a lavish affair to celebrate the successful merger with a rival firm. It was the culmination of a year of relentless work for Richard, a deal that would cement his legacy. Victoria had spent the afternoon in a flurry of preparations, her personal stylist fussing over the deep sapphire gown that cascaded over her baby bump, a team of hair and makeup artists sculpting her into the perfect image of a billionaire's wife. But beneath the layers of silk and diamonds, a sense of unease gnawed at her. Richard had been unusually distant all week, his conversations clipped and his eyes holding a secret she couldn't decipher. As she stood before the full-length mirror, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was adorning herself for a sacrifice. The woman staring back at her was beautiful, poised, and utterly alone. The drive to the Grand Oak Ballroom was silent, the tension in the back of the Rolls-Royce so thick she could have cut it with the diamond-encrusted knife she'd received as a wedding present. Richard was engrossed in his phone, a small, tight smile playing on his lips as he typed. He didn't notice the way her hands trembled in her lap, or the way her gaze lingered on his profile, searching for a flicker of the man she had married. The ballroom was a sea of familiar faces. Business partners, rivals, and the city's elite, all swathed in couture and dripping with jewels. The air buzzed with a mixture of genuine admiration and thinly veiled envy for the man of the hour. As they entered, a wave of photographers descended upon them, their flashes like a barrage of tiny explosions. Richard, ever the showman, pulled her closer, his arm a possessive weight around her shoulders, a smile plastered on his face for the cameras. It was a well-rehearsed pose, one they had perfected over the years. But tonight it felt like a betrayal. Throughout the cocktail hour, Victoria played her part with an Oscar-worthy performance. She smiled, she mingled, she accepted congratulations on Richard's success and well wishes for their impending arrival. But her eyes kept drifting back to Richard, who was holding court at the center of the room. He was in his element, a king in his castle, and she was just another one of his prized possessions on display. It was during dinner that the first tremor of the earthquake to come made itself felt. Victoria was seated at the head table, a carefully curated collection of the city's most influential figures. The conversation was a predictable blend of market trends and summer travel plans. She was picking at her deconstructed Caesar salad when a woman approached their table. She was stunning in that overtly sensual way that was the antithesis of Victoria's classic beauty. Her dress was a fiery red, clinging to a figure that was all curves and confidence. Her dark hair was styled in loose cascading waves, and her eyes, the color of warm whiskey, were fixed on Richard. "Richard, darling," she purred, her voice a low, seductive drawl that seemed to silence the surrounding chatter. Victoria watched as Richard's face, which had been a mask of cool professionalism, broke into a genuine, unguarded smile. It was a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Isabella," he said, his voice laced with an intimacy that sent a fresh wave of ice through Victoria's veins. He stood, his hand lingering at the small of Isabella's back as he introduced her to the table. "Everyone, this is Isabella Rossi, our new head of international marketing. She was instrumental in the final stages of the merger." Isabella's eyes swept over the table, her gaze briefly flicking to Victoria's baby bump before meeting her eyes. There was a flicker of something in their depths, triumph, pity, or perhaps a mixture of both. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you all," she said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Victoria's own smile felt frozen on her face. She extended a hand. her voice a cool, steady tone that betrayed none of the turmoil raging within her. "Welcome to the team, Ms. Rozzi." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Victoria couldn't taste the seared scallops or the perfectly aged filet mignon. The lively conversation around her faded into a dull roar. The only thing she could focus on was the way Richard's attention kept drifting back to Isabella. The subtle glances, the shared smiles, the easy camaraderie that spoke of a history Victoria was not a part of. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to see her father, a retired judge with a sharp mind and an even sharper intuition, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right, Victoria? You look pale." She forced a reassuring smile. "Just a little tired, Dad. This baby is taking all my energy." But her father's gaze was fixed on Richard, who was now laughing at something Isabella had whispered in his ear. When he looked back at Victoria, his expression was grim. He knew just as she did that this was more than just a passing flirtation. This was a paradigm shift, a tectonic plate moving beneath the foundations of their lives. As the dessert plates were cleared and the waiters began to pour the celebratory champagne, Richard stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent, all eyes on the man at the podium. Victoria's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had a premonition, a cold, sickening certainty that what he was about to say would change everything. He began with the usual platitudes, thanking his team, his partners, the board of directors. He spoke of the future of expansion of a new era for Sterling Enterprises. And then he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed not on Victoria, but on Isabella. "This merger is not the only new chapter in my life," he began, his voice ringing with a conviction that made Victoria's blood run cold. He beckoned for Isabella to join him on the stage. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her red dress a slash of color against the dark suits and muted tones of the room. Richard took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it as he turned to face the stunned audience. "As many of you know, my personal life has been in a state of transition." He glanced briefly, almost dismissively, in Victoria's direction. "Victoria and I have been separated for some time now." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie, a bald-faced, audacious lie. They lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, were expecting a child together. But Richard wasn't finished. He raised Isabella's hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "And so it is with immense joy that I introduce to you the future of Sterling Enterprises and the future of my life." He paused for dramatic effect, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "My new wife, Isabella Sterling." The world tilted on its axis. The chandeliers seemed to sway, the chatter of the room dissolving into a deafening roar in Victoria's ears. She saw the flash of a diamond ring on Isabella's finger, a gaudy, ostentatious thing that was so unlike the classic elegance of the ring Richard had given her. She saw the triumphant smirk on Isabella's face, the smug satisfaction in her eyes, and she saw the cold, unapologetic finality in Richard's. He hadn't just been having an affair. He had been living a double life. He had replaced her not just in his bed, but in his entire world. And he had chosen to announce it in the most public, most humiliating way possible. In that moment, something inside Victoria snapped. The hurt, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all coalesced into a single white-hot point of rage. The fragile, graceful facade she had so carefully maintained for years shattered, and in its place was a woman of steel. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply rose to her feet, her movements slow and deliberate, a queen surveying the ruins of her kingdom. She met Richard's gaze across the crowded room, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her grace for submission. He had made a fatal miscalculation. As the first shocked whispers began to ripple through the ballroom, Victoria turned and walked away, her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The war had just been declared, and she was already planning her first move. He had introduced his mistress as his new wife. Tomorrow his pregnant and soon-to-be ex-wife would freeze his assets, and then she would dismantle his empire piece by piece. The walk out of the Grand Oak Ballroom was the longest of Victoria's life. Every step was a battle against the tidal wave of emotions threatening to consume her. The shocked faces of their friends and colleagues blurred into a kaleidoscope of pity and morbid curiosity. She could feel their eyes on her back, their whispers like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at her skin. But she didn't falter. Her spine remained ramrod straight, her chin held at an angle of defiance. She was a sterling, and she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The moment the heavy oak doors of the ballroom closed behind her, cutting off the cacophony of her public humiliation, her composure fractured. A single ragged sob escaped her lips, a sound of such raw anguish that it seemed to echo in the cavernous, empty hallway. She leaned against the cool marble wall, her hand pressed against her stomach as if to shield her unborn child from the shrapnel of his father's betrayal. Her driver, a kind elderly man named Arthur, who had been with her family for years, rushed to her side, his face etched with concern. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" Victoria couldn't bring herself to speak. She simply nodded a gesture that was more of a tremor than a confirmation. Arthur, with a discretion born of long years of service to the wealthy and their often dramatic lives, simply opened the door to the waiting Rolls-Royce and helped her inside. The drive back to the Park Avenue penthouse was a blur of city lights and silent tears. The glittering skyline that had once been a symbol of her and Richard's shared ambition now seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of the life that had been so cruelly snatched away. When she arrived, the apartment felt cavernous and cold, a mausoleum of broken promises. The photographs on the walls, a curated collection of their happiest moments, now felt like a cruel joke. There was a photo of them on their wedding day. Richard's eyes alight with what she had thought was love. Another of them in St. Bart's, their skin tanned and their smiles carefree. And the most recent one, a professional shot from a few months ago, her baby bump just beginning to show Richard's hand resting protectively on it. A lie. It was all a lie. With a surge of fury, she ripped the photo from the wall, the sound of shattering glass a satisfying counterpoint to the shattering of her heart. One by one, she tore down the images of their life together until the walls were bare and the floor was littered with the fragments of their shared past. Exhausted and emotionally drained, she sank onto the plush white sofa, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. The rage that had sustained her had given way to a profound, bone-deep sorrow. How could she have been so blind? The signs had all been there, the late nights, the secret phone calls, the emotional distance. She had chosen to ignore them, to believe in the fantasy she had so desperately wanted to be real. She thought of the baby, her son, and a fresh wave of grief washed over her. He would be born into a broken home, a pawn in a war he had no part in starting. But as she cradled her belly, a new resolve began to take root in the barren landscape of her heart. She would not let Richard destroy their son's life as he had destroyed hers. She would fight not just for herself, but for her child. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. There was only one person she could call, one person she knew would understand the intricacies of the world she was about to go to war with. The phone rang twice before a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. "Victoria." "It's past midnight. Is everything all right?" It was her father, Judge Robert Vance, a man whose reputation for integrity and sharp legal acumen was legendary in New York legal circles. He had retired from the bench 5 years ago, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "Dad," Victoria's voice broke. "I need you." Without hesitation, he replied, "I'm on my way." An hour later, her father was sitting opposite her, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his face a grim mask as she recounted the events of the evening. She left nothing out, from the subtle signs of Richard's affair to the public brutal announcement of his new wife. When she had finished, the only sound in the room was the gentle clinking of ice in her father's glass. He took a long, slow sip before speaking, his voice calm and measured. "The man is a fool. A cruel, arrogant fool." He leaned forward, his eyes the same shade of deep blue as hers, locking onto her own. "But he has made a critical error. He has underestimated you. And that, my dear, is where we have the advantage." He set his glass down on the polished mahogany coffee table, the sound a sharp, decisive rap. "First thing in the morning we call my lawyer. Not your and Richard's lawyer, not a family lawyer, my lawyer, a shark. We're going to hit him where it hurts Victoria. We're going to go after his money." A flicker of the old Victoria, the woman who had once been a sharp, ambitious corporate lawyer herself before giving it up to be Richard's wife, sparked in her eyes. "But how all our assets are in joint accounts in trusts. He has a team of the best financial advisors in the country." Her father smiled, a cold, predatory smile that she had seen him use on the bench to intimidate cocky young lawyers. "He may have a team of advisors, but we have something better. We have the truth, and we have the element of surprise." He stood and began to pace the room, his mind already working, formulating a strategy. "He's arrogant. He believes he's untouchable. He won't be expecting a fight. He'll be expecting you to fall apart, to retreat, to negotiate a quiet, dignified divorce. We will do none of those things." He stopped in front of her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We will be ruthless. We will be relentless. And we will win." For the first time since she had walked out of that ballroom, Victoria felt a glimmer of hope. She was not alone in this fight. She had her father, a man who had never lost a battle in his life, and she had a new, steely resolve. Richard had started a war. She was going to finish it. The next morning, Victoria woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear anger. She dressed not in one of her usual flowing feminine dresses, but in a sharply tailored pantsuit, the kind she used to wear when she was a lawyer. It was a suit of armor, a statement of intent. She met her father in his study, a room lined with leather-bound law books and filled with the scent of old paper and wood smoke. Standing beside him was a woman in her late 40s, her hair cut in a severe, no-nonsense bob, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "Victoria, this is Evelyn Reed," her father said, "the best divorce lawyer in New York, and for the next few months your new best friend." Evelyn Reed shook her hand, her grip firm and her gaze direct. "Mrs. Sterling, I've read the prenuptial agreement you sent over last night. It's comprehensive." Victoria nodded. The prenup had been Richard's idea, a standard precaution for a man of his wealth. She had signed it without a second thought, blinded by love and the belief that it would never be anything more than a piece of paper in a file. "It is," Victoria agreed, "but it was signed under the assumption of a faithful and honest marriage. Richard has violated both of those conditions." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "Indeed, he has. And his very public, very humiliating declaration of a new marriage, while still legally married to you, and with you carrying his child, is a gift. A very, very expensive gift." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "We need to move quickly before he has a chance to hide his assets. We'll file for an immediate injunction, a temporary restraining order that will freeze all joint accounts, trusts, and credit lines. We'll also put a lien on all his properties, both personal and commercial." Victoria's eyes widened. "Is that possible?" "It is, when you have a husband who has so flagrantly and publicly committed adultery and emotional distress," Evelyn said, her voice laced with the confidence of a woman who knew she was at the top of her game. "We'll argue that he is a flight risk, that he may try to move his assets offshore to protect them from the divorce settlement. Given his impulsive behavior, it's not an unreasonable argument." She slid a document across the table to Victoria. "This is the petition. I need you to read it carefully and then sign it." Victoria picked up the pen, her hand steady. She read through the legal jargon, the cold, formal language, a stark contrast to the hot, messy emotions of the past 24 hours. But as she read, she felt a sense of power. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman taking control of her life. She signed her name with a firm, decisive stroke. "Good," Evelyn said, taking the document back. "I'll have this filed within the hour. By lunchtime, Richard Sterling will find himself a very rich man with no access to his money." A small, grim smile touched Victoria's lips. The war had begun, and she had just fired the first shot. The news of the injunction hit Richard Sterling like a physical blow. He was in a board meeting, basking in the afterglow of his successful merger and his bold public declaration of his new life with Isabella. He was feeling invincible, on top of the world. And then his phone buzzed, a frantic text from his personal banker. "All your accounts have been frozen. Call me immediately." Richard excused himself from the meeting, a knot of confusion and irritation tightening in his stomach. He dialed his banker, his voice sharp with impatience. "What the hell is going on? I have a multi-million-dollar deal closing this afternoon." The banker's voice was strained, apologetic. "I'm sorry, Richard. We received a court order this morning, a temporary restraining order. All your personal and business assets are frozen pending a court hearing." Richard's blood ran cold. "On what grounds a petition filed by your wife, Victoria Sterling?" The name hung in the air, a testament to his own monumental stupidity. Victoria. He had dismissed her, disregarded her, humiliated her. He had expected her to crumble, to retreat into her grief and accept a quiet, generous settlement. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to fight back. He ended the call, his hands trembling with a rage so intense it was almost blinding. He stormed back into the boardroom, his face a thunderous mask. "The meeting is over," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned to his personal assistant. "Get Evelyn Reed on the phone. Now." He knew the name. Evelyn Reed was a shark, a pit bull in a designer suit. The fact that Victoria had hired her was a clear declaration of war. He spent the next hour on the phone with his own team of lawyers, their voices a panicked chorus of disbelief and damage control. The injunction was ironclad. Victoria had timed it perfectly, hitting him at his most vulnerable right after his public display of arrogance. The judge, no doubt influenced by Victoria's father's reputation and the sheer audacity of Richard's actions, had granted the order without hesitation. He was, for all intents and purposes, a billionaire with no cash. His credit cards were declined. His lines of credit were suspended. The deal he was supposed to close that afternoon was now in jeopardy. His fury, which had been a simmering volcano, finally erupted. He swept his arm across his mahogany desk, sending a cascade of papers, a laptop, and a half-empty coffee cup crashing to the floor. He let out a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, a sound that echoed through the hushed, terrified halls of Sterling Enterprises. He had built this empire from the ground up. He had clawed his way to the top of a ruthless, unforgiving industry. He would not be brought down by a woman he had so carelessly cast aside. He grabbed his phone and dialed Victoria's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, each unanswered call fueling his rage. He left a string of increasingly vitriolic messages, his voice raw with a mixture of threats and disbelief. "How dare you, Victoria? After everything I've given you, you'll regret this. I'll see you in court. I'll take everything. You'll be left with nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." But his threats felt hollow even to his own ears. He had no power here. She had outmaneuvered him, outsmarted him. She had taken his greatest strength, his wealth, and turned it into his greatest weakness. Meanwhile, Victoria was in Evelyn Reed's office, a calm oasis of muted colors and quiet professionalism in the heart of the city. She had listened with a detached sense of vindication to the increasingly frantic messages from Richard. She felt no fear, only a cold, hard certainty that she had made the right decision. "He's panicking," Evelyn said, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. "And when people panic, they make mistakes." She slid a new set of documents across the table to Victoria. This is a list of forensic accountants, the best in the business. We need to find out exactly what he's worth where all his money is hidden. Richard is a smart man. He'll have offshore accounts, shell corporations, assets hidden in places we don't even know exist. Victoria nodded her mind, already shifting into the familiar analytical mode of her former legal career. I can help with that. I may have been out of the game for a while, but I know how he thinks. I know the kinds of risks he's willing to take. She remembered conversations she had overheard, late-night phone calls she had pretended not to listen to, hushed meetings with men whose names she had committed to memory. She had a wealth of information, a roadmap to Richard's hidden empire that she had never realized she possessed. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of her own power, a power that had nothing to do with her husband's name or his money. It was her own intelligence, her own resilience, her own strength. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. Victoria and Evelyn assembled their team, a formidable force of legal and financial experts. They worked with a quiet, focused intensity fueled by a shared sense of purpose and a righteous anger. That evening, as Victoria returned to the empty penthouse, she found a package waiting for her. It was from her father. Inside was a small velvet box. She opened it to find a single, exquisitely crafted gold key. Attached to it was a note written in her father's elegant, familiar script. For your new home, a new start. You are stronger than you know, Victoria. And you are not alone. The address was for a brownstone in the West Village, a beautiful historic building on a quiet, tree-lined street. A place that was hers and hers alone. She looked around the penthouse at the bare walls and the lingering ghosts of a life that was no longer hers. She felt a pang of sadness, a final fleeting moment of grief for the love she had thought was real. And then she turned and walked away, the gold key clutched in her hand. She was not just freezing his assets. She was freezing him out of her life. She was starting over, and she was ready for whatever came next. The fury of Richard was just beginning, but so was her own quiet, unyielding strength. The first court hearing was a spectacle. The media, having caught wind of the salacious details of the Sterling divorce, had descended upon the courthouse in a frenzy. The story had all the elements of a blockbuster drama: a billionaire tycoon, a scorned pregnant wife, and a beautiful, ambitious mistress. Victoria, flanked by her father and Evelyn Reed, moved through the throng of reporters with a quiet dignity that was in stark contrast to Richard's barely concealed rage. He arrived with Isabella on his arm, a move that was clearly intended to be a show of defiance but which only served to make him look arrogant and foolish in the eyes of the judge. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with animosity. Victoria avoided looking at Richard, focusing instead on the calm, steady presence of her father beside her. She could feel Richard's eyes on her, a burning glare of anger and betrayal. But she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Evelyn Reed was brilliant. She laid out their case with a cool, methodical precision, presenting the evidence of Richard's public humiliation of Victoria, his flagrant adultery, and the potential for him to hide his assets. She painted a picture of a man who was reckless, impulsive, and untrustworthy. Richard's lawyer, a high-priced corporate attorney who was clearly out of his depth in the messy world of divorce court, blustered and objected, but his arguments were weak and unconvincing. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for being tough on arrogant husbands, was clearly not impressed. She upheld the injunction, extending it for another 30 days. She also granted Victoria exclusive use of the Park Avenue penthouse, a move that sent a fresh wave of fury across Richard's face. And in a final crushing blow, she ordered Richard to pay Victoria's legal fees and a substantial monthly sum for living expenses. Richard stormed out of the courtroom, his face a mask of thunderous rage. Isabella, her own face pale and strained, hurried after him. Victoria watched them go, a small grim sense of satisfaction settling in her heart. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, Victoria and her team of forensic accountants began the painstaking process of unraveling Richard's complex financial empire. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and cleverly hidden assets. But Victoria had been a better student of her husband's business dealings than he had ever realized. She remembered names he had mentioned in passing, fragments of conversations she had overheard, details she had filed away in the back of her mind without even realizing it. She worked tirelessly, poring over documents, following money trails, connecting dots that no one else could see. And as she dug deeper, she began to uncover a pattern of deception that went far beyond infidelity. Richard hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been cheating his partners, his investors, and the IRS. He had been skimming profits, laundering money, and engaging in a host of illegal activities that could not only destroy his business, but could also land him in prison. The revelation was a shock, but it also solidified her resolve. This was no longer just about a divorce. It was about justice. It was about exposing Richard for the corrupt, amoral man he truly was. One evening, as she was working late in her new West Village brownstone, a place that was quickly becoming her sanctuary, her private investigator called. He had been looking into Isabella Rossi's background, and he had found something interesting. Isabella Rossi is not her real name, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. Her name is Isabella Delgado, and she has a history, a long history of attaching herself to wealthy, powerful men and then disappearing with a sizable chunk of their fortunes. He sent Victoria a file, a collection of articles, police reports, and court documents. It was a sordid tale of seduction, betrayal, and financial ruin. Isabella was a professional, a black widow who had left a trail of broken men and empty bank accounts in her wake. Victoria's blood ran cold. Richard hadn't just been having an affair with a beautiful, ambitious woman. He had been ensnared by a predator, a con artist who was likely playing a long game of her own. A new terrifying thought occurred to her. Was Isabella working alone? Or was she part of a larger scheme? Was Richard a victim in all of this as well as a perpetrator? The question hung in the air, a chilling possibility that changed the entire dynamic of the game. Victoria realized that this was no longer a two-player battle. There was a third player, a shadowy figure whose motives and endgame were a complete mystery. She looked at the file on her computer screen, at the smiling, beautiful face of Isabella Delgado, and for the first time she felt a flicker of something akin to pity for her husband. He had been a fool, a cruel, arrogant fool. But he had also been a pawn in a much more dangerous game than he had ever imagined. And Victoria, in her quest for justice, had just stumbled into the middle of it. The stakes had just been raised, and the danger was no longer just financial. It was personal, and it was deadly. The next day, Victoria received a package. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a single perfect white rose, and a note written in elegant looping script. "Be careful, Victoria. You're not the only one who wants to see Richard Sterling fall." The message was clear. She had an anonymous ally, someone who was watching from the shadows, someone who knew more about Richard and Isabella than she did. But who was it? A disgruntled business partner, a former victim of Isabella's, or someone else entirely? The mystery deepened, and the danger intensified. Victoria knew that she was walking a tightrope with Richard's rage on one side and a shadowy, unknown entity on the other. But she also knew that she couldn't back down. She had come too far. She had to see this through, not just for herself and her son, but for all the other people Richard and Isabella had harmed. She placed the white rose in a vase on her desk, a symbol of the strange, dangerous alliance she had unwittingly formed. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play. She was no longer just a scorned wife seeking revenge. She was a woman on a mission, a warrior fighting for truth and justice in a world of lies and deceit. And she would not rest until she had uncovered the whole ugly truth, no matter the cost. The single white rose sat on Victoria's desk, a beautiful but unsettling symbol. Its cryptic message, "Be careful, Victoria, you're not the only one who wants to see Richard Sterling fall," was a constant reminder that she was navigating a battlefield with more players than she could see. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a conspiracy, and she was caught in the middle, uncertain of who was friend or foe. Her days became a disciplined routine of war room strategy sessions with Evelyn Reed and the forensic accountants. The woman who once planned galas now hunted for ghost corporations in offshore tax havens. Immersed in financial statements and legal documents, Victoria felt a dormant part of herself reawaken the sharp analytical mind of the corporate lawyer she had been before marrying Richard. She was rediscovering her own strength, a power independent of the sterling name. While Victoria grew stronger, Richard was crumbling. The asset freeze had him in a chokehold, his business bleeding investors and his reputation in ruins. The strain was also fraying Isabella. Monitored by Victoria's investigator, the triumphant mistress had morphed into a tense, nervous figure, the pressure clearly mounting. They were trapped animals, and Victoria knew trapped animals were dangerous, but also predictable. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the form of a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no rose, just a small black rectangle that promised answers. Her instincts, which had become her most trusted guide, told her this was a pivotal moment. She inserted the drive into her laptop, her heart pounding. A single password-protected folder appeared. On a hunch, she typed a name, Delgado. It opened. What she found was staggering. The drive contained a meticulously compiled dossier on Isabella Rossi, whose real name was Isabella Delgado. It detailed a sordid history of seducing wealthy, powerful men and then vanishing with their fortunes. But the truth was even more complex. The drive held copies of emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls between Isabella and a male collaborator. They spoke of Richard as the mark and the merger as the payday. Their plan was cold and clinical. Isabella would secure her position as the new Mrs. Sterling, and then together they would bleed Richard's empire dry. The most chilling revelation was that this collaborator wasn't just a partner in crime. He was Isabella's husband. They were a professional team of predators. As Victoria scrolled through the damning evidence, a familiar name in an email made her blood run cold. It was the name of the man who had been Richard's closest friend and business partner for over a decade, a man who had offered Victoria his deepest sympathies on the night of the gala. It was Marcus Thorne. The entire conspiracy snapped into place with sickening clarity. Marcus, eaten away by a secret jealousy of Richard's success, was the mastermind. He had fed Isabella the inside information needed to ensnare Richard. He had orchestrated the entire affair to shatter Richard personally and professionally. The white rose, the anonymous tips, it had all come from Marcus. He had been using Victoria as his own unwitting weapon, expecting her to be a predictable, grief-stricken wife whose legal actions would perfectly serve his own vengeful plot. He had made the same mistake Richard had. He had profoundly underestimated her. Leaning back, her mind reeling, Victoria saw the full chessboard. This was never just about Richard's infidelity. It was a multi-layered betrayal, and she had been cast as a pawn. But pawns, she thought with a surge of cold fury, can become queens. She would not be an instrument of Marcus Thorne's revenge. She would be the agent of his and Isabella's downfall. She picked up the phone, her hand steady and her purpose clear. "Dad," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "I know who our anonymous ally is. He isn't our ally at all. And I know exactly what we need to do." Victoria walked into Evelyn Reed's office the next morning not as a victim but as a strategist. She laid out the evidence from the USB drive detailing the entire sordid plot. Evelyn's professional composure was tinged with awe. "This is criminal," the lawyer stated. "Conspiracy, fraud, extortion. We take this to the district attorney." "We will," Victoria agreed, "but we're going to do it my way." "Hey." A plan was already forming in her mind, a trap not just for Isabella, but for the puppet master himself. She would turn their own conspiracy against them. The game had changed, and Victoria was about to make her move. The plan was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, as audacious as it was brilliant. It hinged on exploiting the very greed and arrogance that had driven her enemies. Victoria, guided by Evelyn and her father, was no longer just a participant in this war. She was its architect. The first move was to create an illusion, a ghost asset so tantalizing it would be impossible for Marcus and Isabella to ignore. Through a trusted media contact, a story was carefully leaked. It whispered of a secret offshore holding company in the Bahamas, an untouched reserve of Richard's wealth worth hundreds of millions, which he was now preparing to liquidate in his desperation. The asset was a complete fabrication, a phantom born in the strategy sessions in Evelyn Reed's office, but it was crafted to seem utterly real. As anticipated, the story ignited a firestorm in the financial world, and more importantly, landed squarely in the laps of Marcus Thorne and Isabella Rossi. Victoria's private investigator confirmed their frenzied reaction. They were circling the bait. To force their hand, Evelyn filed a new motion in court. It was a bold legal maneuver seeking to have Richard declared financially incompetent due to his erratic behavior and the undue influence of Isabella. The motion requested a court-appointed trustee to seize control of all sterling assets to protect them. This was a direct threat to Marcus and Isabella's endgame. If a trustee stepped in, their phantom prize in the Bahamas would vanish into a legal quagmire. The clock was ticking. They had to make their move now. The trap was set. The call Victoria had been waiting for came on a stormy Thursday night. It was Richard, his voice stripped of its usual bravado, replaced by a raw, desperate edge. "Victoria, we need to talk," he began, the words strained. "It's about Isabella, about everything." Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was a steady, cool line in the storm. "I'm listening." He stumbled through a panicked story. Isabella had presented him with a lifeline, a way to get his money out and escape. She told him of the Bahamian company, a forgotten asset, and claimed she had a private investor ready to buy it for cash, no questions asked. Richard, desperate to reclaim any semblance of control, had almost agreed. But a sliver of doubt, a flicker of his old business acumen, had stopped him. He finally saw the predatory glint in Isabella's eyes for what it was. "I think she's playing me, Victoria," he whispered, his voice cracking with the admission. "I think she's been playing me all along." This was the critical moment. "She is, Richard," Victoria said, her voice softening with an unexpected wave of pity. "And she's not working alone. She laid out the entire conspiracy for him, Isabella's real identity, Marcus Thorne's deep-seated betrayal, the cold, calculated plan to utterly destroy him." A long, choked silence hung on the line, the sound of a man's world completely shattering. "What do I do?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "You do exactly what I tell you," she commanded, her tone now firm, authoritative. "You play your part. And for once, Richard, you trust me." The final act was staged at a discreet high-end club in Midtown, a bastion of old money and whispered deals. Richard, wearing a wire provided by the district attorney's office, was to meet Isabella and her investor to sign away the phantom company. Victoria was stationed in a surveillance van a block away, her eyes glued to the monitors that showed the drama unfolding, detectives from the NYPD's white-collar crime unit flanking her. She watched Richard enter, his performance as a broken, desperate man unnervingly convincing. Isabella, a vision in crimson, greeted him with a kiss that was pure venom. And then the investor arrived. It was Marcus Thorne, striding in with the unshakable confidence of a man who believes he has already won. The three of them sat, the air thick with deceit. Victoria listened, her breath held as Richard played his role to perfection, feigning hesitation and doubt, drawing his enemies deeper into the web. Finally, Marcus's patience wore thin. He dropped the pretense, his voice dripping with venomous pride, as he boasted of his master plan, of how he had orchestrated Richard's ruin from the start, mocking his friend's blindness and arrogance. Isabella joined in, her contempt palpable as she recounted her methods of manipulation. It was a full, damning confession broadcast directly to the detectives in the van. With the confession recorded, Victoria gave the signal. Just as Marcus slid the final document across the table for Richard's signature, the doors to the private room burst open. "NYPD," the detectives announced, their badges held high. "Marcus Thorne, Isabella Delgado, you are under arrest." The transformation on their faces was instantaneous and absolute. The smug triumph curdled into sheer primal terror. As they were led away in handcuffs, their expensive clothes suddenly looking like cheap costumes, Marcus's eyes locked onto a security camera. In that moment, he knew. He hadn't been defeated by Richard. He had been comprehensively outplayed and destroyed by the woman he had fatally underestimated. Victoria leaned back in her chair in the van, a long, slow breath of victory escaping her lips. It was over. It was. She had won. Stepping out into the cool city night, she felt a profound sense of release. She had faced the architects of her misery, and using her own intellect and courage, had brought their world crashing down. She was Victoria Vance Sterling, and she was finally indisputably free. In the aftermath of the arrests, the full scope of Marcus Thorne's and Isabella Delgado's deception was laid bare for the world to see. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks, a salacious tale of greed, betrayal, and high society intrigue. The trial was a media circus, with every detail of the conspiracy dissected and analyzed in excruciating detail. Marcus and Isabella, faced with the overwhelming evidence against them, including their own recorded confessions, had no choice but to plead guilty. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their glamorous lives reduced to the stark, sterile reality of a prison cell. For Richard, the reckoning was of a different kind. He had been a victim, but he was not an innocent one. His arrogance, his infidelity, his cruelty towards Victoria had all been the catalyst for his own downfall. He had lost his company, his reputation, and the respect of everyone who had ever mattered to him. The injunction on his assets was eventually lifted, but what remained was a fraction of his former fortune. He was a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was humbled, broken, a man forced to confront the wreckage of his own making. He and Victoria finalized their divorce quietly, without the drama and acrimony that had defined the beginning of their separation. In the end, there was nothing left to fight over. On the day the divorce was finalized, Richard asked to see her one last time. They met in a small, neutral cafe a world away from the glamorous restaurants and exclusive clubs they had once frequented. He looked older, tired. The arrogance that had once been his defining characteristic was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound sadness. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said, his voice raw with a sincerity she had never heard from him before. "For everything. For my cruelty. For my foolishness. For not appreciating the incredible woman I had by my side." He looked down at his hands, at the faint tan line where his wedding ring used to be. "You were always too good for me. I see that now." Victoria listened, a strange sense of peace settling over her. The anger, the bitterness, it had all dissipated, leaving behind a clean, quiet space. "I forgive you, Richard," she said, and she meant it. "Not for you, but for me. I can't carry that anger with me into my new life." She stood to leave, her hand resting for a moment on her now prominent baby bump. "I wish you well, Richard. I hope you find some peace." And with that she walked away, leaving him to his coffee and his regrets. It was the final definitive end to a chapter of her life that had been defined by him. A few weeks later, Victoria gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Nicholas after her grandfather, a man of quiet strength and unwavering integrity. She held him in her arms, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and felt a love so fierce, so profound, it eclipsed everything that had come before. He was her future, her hope, her reason for everything. She raised him in the West Village brownstone, a home filled with love, laughter, and the scent of baking bread, rather than the cold, sterile perfection of the Park Avenue penthouse. Her father was a constant, doting presence, a proud grandfather who delighted in spoiling his grandson. Victoria did not return to the world of corporate law. She had found a new calling. She used a portion of her divorce settlement to start a foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial assistance to women who were victims of financial abuse and fraud. She became a champion for the voiceless, a warrior for the vulnerable. She used her own experience, her own hard-won wisdom to help other women reclaim their lives, their power, their sense of self. She was no longer Victoria Sterling, the billionaire's wife. She was Victoria Vance, a mother, a philanthropist, a woman who had taken the shattered pieces of her life and rebuilt them into something stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely more meaningful. One sunny afternoon, as she was pushing Nicholas in his stroller through Central Park, she saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Richard sitting alone on a park bench throwing breadcrumbs to the pigeons. He looked up and saw her, and for a moment, their eyes met across the green expanse of the park. He gave her a small, sad smile, a silent acknowledgement of all that had been lost and all that had been found. Victoria smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile of a woman who was at peace with her past and excited about her future. And then she turned and continued on her way, pushing her son towards the playground, towards the laughter and the sunshine, towards the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life that she had built for herself. The drama was over. The story was hers to write. And it was just beginning. The story of Victoria Sterling is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal. She transformed from a scorned wife into a master of her own destiny, proving that with intelligence, courage, and a refusal to be a victim, you can not only survive the storm, but also learn to command the winds. Her journey from heartbreak to empowerment is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.